What is going on, everyone? This is Eric coming at you from just outside of Hartford, Connecticut. And today we will be discussing the Cole Hamels trade, which occurred on July 31st, 2015. Now, this trade, the original part of the trade, was made between the Texas Rangers and the Philadelphia Phillies. Now we'll do a little dive into the reason this trade was made. So, the Rangers at this point, they were not in the playoffs. They were not in the playoff picture, but they were just on the outside of it. So they decided, what would be very good is to help out our bullpen and our starting pitching staff. They had a weaker pitching staff at that point, and one of their better pitchers had been hurt, so they wanted to replace him. And Diekman was a solid reliever in and of himself, so they were excited about that. They wanted the two. Hamels had the playoff experience, which was something that the Rangers could definitely use. As we know, he and the Phillies had made runs in 2007 through 2011. And Hamels was, of course, the World Series MVP in 2008. Now, on the Phillies side of this trade, they needed some young prospects to replenish a weakened farm system. And the Phillies were not a good team at this point in time. They were one of the worst teams in Major League Baseball. Right around this time, they had the worst record in baseball. I think it was the 2015 season actually was the year that they had the worst record in baseball. So it made sense to get prospects for a player like Cole Hamels. Now, Hamels was under contract for a few more years under a relatively team-friendly contract, which is what pushed Texas to trade for him despite the fact that they were not a contender at this point in time when the trade was made. Now, who did they acquire? Now, we know the Rangers got Cole Hamels and Jake Diekman. The Phillies, in turn, got 5 prospects and essentially the contract of one of the players. Now, the 5 prospects they got were outfielder Nick Williams, catcher Jorge Alfaro, a trio of pitchers in Jared Eichhoff, Jake Thompson, and Alec Asher, as well as essentially the contract of starting pitcher Matt Harrison, whose experience was missing from, the Rangers because he had gotten hurt. Now, we'll, of course, jump into this trade, and we start off with the Texas Rangers, as they're the team who acquired Cole Hamels, the biggest player in this trade. And Hamels had a solid 3 years in Texas. He wasn't the best pitcher in the league, but he was a good pitcher. He was a very good pitcher. He figured out what he was doing, and he got himself into it. He helped spark the team into a playoff run for the 2015 season. They didn't have a big run in the playoffs, but the fact that he helped them turn around the season, they were about 500. He joins the team, they start doing better. It's just a nice little spark, It doesn't necessarily matter that he's not an offensive player, but sometimes you acquire a pitcher and your team's confidence just soars. Now, after 3 seasons at the 2018 trade deadline, it became apparent that the Rangers were not going to be competing anytime soon. So they traded Hamels to the Chicago Cubs in exchange for a trio of players in relief pitcher Eddie Butler, pitcher Rollie Lacey, and outfielder Alexander Ovalis. So Eddie Butler himself, he had a half season in Texas. He didn't do that good, and then he ends up walking. Alexander Ovalis, real easy, still in the minors for Texas. Now, Rollie Lacey is an interesting one. So he spent some time in the minors for the team, and then after the 2018 season, he gets traded in a 3-team trade. So this 3-team trade is on the bottom here between the Texas Rangers, who will be in blue, the Oakland Athletics, who will be in orange, and the Tampa Bay Rays, who will be in whatever you want to call this color. We'll call it magenta. So the Rangers would acquire a trio of pitchers from the Rays and a utility man from the Athletics. Now, the utility man, Eli White from the Athletics, and the pitchers were starting pitcher Brock Burke, relief pitcher Kyle Bird, and pitcher Yoel Espino. How did these players turn out for the Rangers? Well, Eli White, he's still a minor leaguer for the team, so the jury's still out on him. Yoel Espino, he spent a season in the minors, I should say, for the Rangers before he himself walked. He actually signed with Boston, so he's gone. Kyle Bird, he spent the 2019 season bouncing between the minors and the majors for the team. He does have a big league save to his name, so there's that. And he's still in the organization. Brock Burke, he made 6 starts for the team, the parent club, and he didn't dominate in those 6 starts, but he wasn't rocked or anything. So he's still in the team. He still has a future. Um, so the other players that were involved, of course, Oakland acquired Jerickson Profar from the Rangers, and Tampa Bay acquired Rolly Lacey from the Rangers, as well as Emilio Pagan, a reliever from the Athletics, and the 40th overall pick in the 2019 MLB Draft from the Athletics. We'll get back to these two teams momentarily. Now, Jake Diekman himself, he was a solid reliever for 3 seasons for the Rangers. Now, Diekman, he doesn't necessarily close games that much. He's more of a put him out in the 7th and 8th inning guy. I don't know. The pressure doesn't bode well with him. His pitches aren't good enough to be closer status, but he's still a good enough reliever. So he spends 3 years in Texas doing what he does. He's not dominant by any stretch of the means, but he's still an above average player. Now, at the 2018 trade deadline, they would actually ship Jake Diekman to the Arizona Diamondbacks in exchange for two starting pitchers in Wei-Shan Huang and Joshua Javier. Joshua Javier, still a minor league pitcher in the Texas Rangers organization, while Wei-Shan Huang, he only appeared in a handful of games before he himself was released. So that's how the Rangers did. How did the Phillies do with their prospects? Well, Matt Harrison, I mentioned him before. He had gotten hurt. He was dealing with a back injury, and he never plays for the Phillies. The Phillies essentially just took on his salary to acquire another prospect or two. We don't know exactly who was throwing because they picked up that salary. But the Phillies are a big market club. Texas is too, but the Phillies are the ones that really have the money. Especially in 2015, a lot of their big contracts are gone. So they took the contract of Matt Harrison for essentially a year and a half. He never throws a pitch in the Phillies organization before being released. Nick Williams, the outfielder, he was one of the bigger names in this trade. Him and Jorge Alfaro were the two biggest names for the Phillies. And Nick Williams, he just spent 3 years bouncing between the minors and the majors for the Phillies. And he just couldn't really establish himself. He would have a great pinch hit appearance, then they would give him a start, and he just never got himself going. He actually, I did tweet it out, he ended up getting waived recently. Now, he was waived earlier last month in August, so I did mention it. He was the last piece from this trade that was still in their organization that acquired them. Just wanted to mention it. And he did have disciplinary problems with the Phillies. He had been benched for lack of hustle a few times. The former coach, Pete McEnany, had benched him because he didn't run out a fly ball, and he would taunt teams. He would do stupid things. Like he'd hit a homer, and he would be taunting teams. Just stuff you don't want in your ball club. Now, catcher Jorge Alfaro, he spent 2 years on Phillies roster. Now, the first one, he was the backup to Cameron Rupp. The second one, he was the starting catcher. And he was solid. He did have a good 2 years in Philly, and he ends up getting traded. Now, he's traded a trade in which the Phillies would acquire catcher JT Realmuto from the Marlins in exchange for, obviously, the aforementioned catcher Jorge Alfaro and a pair of pitching prospects in Sixto Sanchez and Will Stewart. Now, Realmuto, he's been the best catcher in baseball, and here we are, 2019. He had a very good 2019. 2020, he's playing even better. Of course, I'm not going to discuss 2020 stats, but we'll see what happens with him. He's a free agent this offseason. He has been playing like the best catcher in baseball, though. As for the last 3 players that they acquired, Jared Eichhoff, he's dealt with injuries over 4.5 seasons for the Phillies, but he has been the most productive player that they acquired from the Rangers, which is just kind of a little depressing when you think about it. But he's been decent. He did walk after the 2019 season. Jake Thompson, I don't know why I keep calling him Jack. He bounced between the minors and the majors for 2.5 years before he himself was designated for the assignment. And Alec Asher, he only spent 1.5 seasons in the organization, and then he ends up getting suspended for PEDs, and they end up trading him for cash considerations. Now that you know how the Phillies and the Rangers did, let's discuss the other team. So, of course, we'll start with the Cubs, who got Cole Hamels. And Cole Hamels was decent over 1.5 seasons with the Cubs. He left after the 2019 season. He signed with the Braves, but he was decent. He wasn't electric. He wasn't the best pitcher in the league, but he was definitely an above-average pitcher for the Cubs. Oakland Athletics, we'll get to them now. Jerickson Profar. Profar, he spent 1 season in Oakland, and he just struggled on offense. And, he wasn't good at all on defense. Now, he was good enough. His utility factor, he played around the diamond for them. That really helped him, but he wasn't the answer that they had hoped he would be at second base. So they ended up trading him after the 2019 season. We will not be discussing that trade all that much, but it just goes to show you. And of course, they just acquired a guy who they're hoping becomes their second baseman of the future. We'll get to that in another video, or in a previous video, I should say. We got to that one with a Tommy La Stella trade. Now, Tampa Bay got really lazy. He's still a minor leaguer for them. The 40th overall pick in the 2019 draft, like I mentioned, was pitcher Seth Johnson, and he's still a minor leaguer. Obviously, he was just picked last year. Now, relief pitcher Emilio Pagan, he had a strong season before a trade. Now, he was good, and he gets traded after the 2019 season. Interestingly enough, both Profar and Pagan went to the San Diego Padres. Of course, we will not really be discussing either trade. And now we'll discuss the Diamondbacks, where Jake Diekman, he struggled. He was not good in Arizona for a half season before he himself ended up leaving in free agency. And last but not least, the Miami Marlins, easy enough. Will Stewart, minor leaguer at this point. Sixto Sanchez did make his MLB debut in late August of 2020. And last but not least, Jorge Alfaro. He had a solid season in 2019 as the team's starting catcher. Of course, we know in 2020 he started the season with on the COVID list. But he's still an above-average catcher. He's a pretty good catcher. He actually is one of the fastest catchers in the league, if not the fastest catcher in the league. So it goes to show you, don't give up on anything. He doesn't have the best defense, but he's a good offensive player. Now, who won the trade? If you go by heads up, the first two teams, of course, the Rangers win with a 13.2 WAR, and the Phillies get themselves a 10.4 WAR. Now, that's always suspect to change because the Phillies still have Realmuto, and the Rangers, while they don't have Hamels anymore, have a bunch of prospects that they got in this trade. While the other teams involved, Chicago did good with a 5.6 WAR from Cole Hamels. The Rays have a 2.3 WAR, all from Pagan. They still have two prospects in their system. The Oakland Athletics have a 0.3 from Profar, not that great. Arizona just got completely screwed in this trade with a negative 0.9 WAR. And the Marlins have a 1.3 WAR as of the end of the 2019 season. That will more likely than not be going up. Sixto Sanchez is one of the better prospects in the league, pitching prospects, and Jorge Alfaro still has a lot of talent. But yeah, that is the Cole Hamels trade in its entirety. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Have a great rest of your day.